Not yet. Hello. Now we are broadcasting. Okay, awesome. So for those that don't know me, I'm Jorge, and I'm in charge of the SPP process. And here we have like some of our committee members. So last time we met at around, I think it was March of this year, and lots of things have happened since then. Especially lots of the things have happened in the modules that we wanted to vote on, and we received some proposals on, and those were better files and Scala JSON AST. So the progress on that, I want to start first the meeting by giving some kind of progress or status update. And the status update on that front is that better files has been having several contributions and has been improving over these last months. And then Scala JSON AST has had some productive discussions, and now, to the best of my knowledge, Matthew is doing some kind of refactoring or redesigning the internal so that the library is more fit for the kind of use cases that he has heard from the community. In which it is my understanding that Eugene and Konrad Malowski, that are also committee members, have been involved in. So right now, like, I want to get started the process again, especially because it's important, and Scala 2.13 is coming. Just a sec, I need to disable this. Awesome. So Scala 2.13 is coming up. The release candidate is scheduled to happen on the 27th April next year, and therefore, we kind of like want to push the Scala platform to happen around the beginning of the year, and the idea would be to have some kind of release of the two modules that the one module that we've included, Scala JSON AST, and other modules that would be added before that. So the deal is, today, we're going to discuss more about the proposal, about the roadmap, or what we want to do at the Scala platform. Also, accept some of your questions as committee members that you can have as things that you think we've missed. And we are also going to vote on better files. Better files was added as to the platform as an incubation module, but right now I think that the delivery is kind of ready to be accepted. And then Patrick Creed, who is not here today, has told me that he wants to release. So we're going to vote on that, and we'll see if better files should be added or not to the platform. And then lastly, we're going to discuss about one proposal that we got from the community in Scala contributors, and we'll dive into the details afterwards. So first off, do you have some questions?
Yeah. So maybe, especially for those who's watching or something, could you provide maybe like a 2-minute description of like a big picture goal of the SPP in general? And like, is it a SPP, or is it one of the flavors of the different platform that, you know, there might exist in the future, or something along these lines?
Yeah, that's a good question. So our effort at the Scala Center right now, and also at Lightbend, is that the Scala team is modularizing the whole language. And that means that some of the things that have been maintained in the Scala library and have been maintained by the Scala team at Lightbend aren't going to be there anymore from 2.13 on. Why is that happening? Well, first, the maintenance burden of having those things and keeping them up to date is quite high. Second, it seems that those kind of utilities that are very tied to the language do not need to be in the language itself. They can live as some kind of platform outside of the core language. And third, it helps simplification, which is an important goal overall. And we don't want to have things that they may or may not be used. So the Scala platform is our answer to this modularization. So we are aware that in order to learn Scala, lots of different users, especially beginners, or not even beginners, but people that work in industry, want to use something established that provides them some kind of core utilities that every language has. and allows them to get things done without really thinking about the details of which library they should use, or without putting too much thought into it. Just going for something established that the community respects and the community wants. So the thing is that there are several flavors, right? Because Scala is a very diverse community. So of course we have different opinions on what the best library is and what the best library is not. So the Scala platform is about giving a least powerful abstraction, like modules that abide by the least powerful abstraction principle, and just aims to provide you with these use cases out of the box without you thinking which library you should use. And those use cases are core use cases that any language has. And well, they kind of end up defining what the language is. Things like I/O, things like utils, file operations, but also system properties, configuration files, maybe lots of different things that end up being crammed into one language. Does that answer your question, Arian?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so it's more like essentially like an extended standard library. Is that kind of like a good understanding?
Yeah, it's just some kind of collection of different modules, and we want these modules to be maintained by the community.
And we want also another question was, is there going to be only one platform, or essentially like sort of like this is our take on the platform, but there might be some other different, like more purely functional platform potentially, for example, right?
Sure. So we haven't said yet what the flavor of the Scala platform is. And that's kind of up to you guys as committee members to decide. But of course, this is not a unique effort. We want the community to create their own platforms as well. And of course, I'm aware that the type level community wants to create its own type level platform at some point. And other communities will also want to do the same. So of course, we welcome these efforts, and we are open to share infrastructure and share utilities when the Scala platform really materializes into something that people can depend on and use. And one of our main goals is basically to kind of entice also organizations and companies using this platform to fund money and chip in some kind of financial help, so that maintainers that are working on these libraries in their open source time or in their free time can also get some kind of revenue, or they can fund other people, maybe students, to kind of help. Because it is my understanding that sometimes open source developers kind of burn out because they have too much on their plates. And it's important that we try to also make their life easier, either by giving them some kind of incentive, economic incentive, or by allowing them to get some help from the community. And sometimes you need some kind of help, financial help. And for that, we want the companies to provide such help.
Cool. Thank you.
Perfect. Is there any other question here on this point? Okay, awesome. So, as you know, I was talking about before about modularization. So, the current plan right now, last time I talked to Adrian, was that he wants to deprecate lots of stuff. Things like parallel collections have already been removed in Scala 2.13. Scala XML, I think, has also been removed. And he is aiming now to remove other more fundamental package names like Scala I/O, Scala Sys, Scala Runtime, Scala Concurrence, Scala Util, Scala Compat, Scala Text, maybe Scala Ref. It depends on lots of different things, and this is up to improvisation. Right now, we don't have a clear idea what's going to go away and what's going to stay. And I think that this is something that the Scala team is going to decide at some point in the next months, and they will provide us some kind of status updates on this. But so far, this is how it kind of it looks. And I think it's important that you as committee members try to also help on the kind of libraries or the kind of tasks that the Scala platform should support, and which of these things may be a good idea to find a module for, and get in touch with other, maintainers of well-known or widely used libraries that try to solve that problem, and try to welcome them or invite them to apply for the Scala platform. So right now it seems that we've gone through I've explained more or less what the Scala platform is and what the roadmap is and what we want to do. Patrick, you've joined now the talk. And you've joined now the discussion. So I said before that our idea would be to have some kind of first release at the beginning of the year, next year. So that would be either January or February, depending on how that fits you and Matthew. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Do you think that would be a good date, or do you think that you have something else that you need to do before the release that could delay that thing?
So what are we also targeting Scala 2.10?
No.
Okay.
So the Scala platform process says basically
2.11 for moving. Okay, yeah. Then it's fine. Yeah.
So the Scala platform modules are forced to maintain this kind of like the contract that we explained in the Scala platform process for all the modules. We ask modules to support the last two major versions that have been released, and in this case that would be 2.11 and 2.12. So 2.10 is out of the scope of Scala platform modules. Of course, if they want to support it, they can, and they are, they can do it without any issue. But the Scala platform itself doesn't have any restriction on that. It only has a restriction on the two major versions, major last versions.
Is it just the JVM?
Yes. So that's kind of like touches on the third discussion point that we're going to have today. But yeah, it's on the JVM. Cool. So
I have a question about the modularization and how the coordination is going to work. Is the idea that the deprecated portions will, when they're code that works well, for example, Scala.concurrent seems to work just fine. Is the idea that the Scala platform will just take over the sort of authority for maintaining it or for distributing it, and then in that case, will all of it be ready at the same time? So when somebody downloads a new Scala 2.13, maybe not for the release candidate, but for the release, is the idea that somebody gets a new 2.13 and they just have to update a dependency and then all of their deprecation warnings go away? Or is it going to be just more ad hoc than that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have figured out yet what we're going to do. Ideally, what we want to do, of course, is to provide very complete details or very complete guides on how the migration should go. To be honest, Scala concurrent seems like the biggest among all these modules, and it's not clear whether it's going to be removed or not. If it is removed, I think that at some point, yeah, someone will need to pick that up and maintain it. And of course, that would be like a prime candidate for the Scala platform, even though there are different libraries that try to solve the same problem. So we can maybe have some kind of discussion, like all the people working on concurrency and Scala can maybe have a chat and try to figure out a reasonable library that could solve most of the problems like Future is doing right now. And also there was a debate on this several days ago in Discourse in Scala contributors. So on this topic, the idea is that we provide some kind of guides, and ideally we have a target module that we can encourage as a replacement. And we want to provide some kind of Scala fix rewrites that will do that process as much as possible. Last time we discussed, we were talking about some kind of tool that will allow us to migrate things from one API to another one, not even like from version to version, but also from library to library. At that point, ScalaFix was not ready yet, but we've had in the last months, Olafur and Yomase have been doing a great job on that front, and it seems that it has materialized into something that can be used for migrations. The last use case I heard is that it was used to migrate from one CATS version, I think it was 09 to 10. So, of course, we like when 2.13 happens to provide this kind of like tooling so that people do not have to fix everything manually, because that would be hell. But I think we have to be honest here and admit that for like when that happens, I don't know when that would happen, but when it does, we need to. We will probably not have replacements for all the things that are going to be removed, and in that case, I think it's reasonable to say to do some kind of like analysis of libraries that like solve the same problem and direct people towards them instead of the previous solution, or some kind of like direct solution. Cool. So we don't have any more questions here. I think it's reasonable that we move to the voting of better files. So better files is this IO library, right? Patrick, can you explain a little bit about it for those that may have not heard about the Scala platform or what better files is?
Sure. So better files, all it does is wraps over Java and IO. It has no dependencies besides just the JDK and the Java IO library. The idea is like there's a lot of common file utils that people do, like read a file, write a file, move directories, copy things. And it's not obvious the way the Java IO library is written to how to do those, because you have to all do this try, open some stream, write something to stream, finally close stream, all that. And there are some missing utils in the Java standard library, like move recursively copying a directory, or changing the permissions, or merging two directories, stuff like that. And better files is just like a thin wrapper. It adds essentially it's called better files because that's how I started using it, by having my own implicit class better file, which wrapped over the java.io.file. And added a lot of utils to it now, and became useful enough that it's in his own standard library. It's in his own SPT Scala library right now. And yeah, the idea is that people wants to do IO in Scala and don't want to think too much about the low-level Java and IO APIs. They can just use utils. A lot of the motivation of the library came from Google's Guava. Guava Java library, which comes with its IO util, and Apache's IO utils, which is another Java library, which pretty much does the same thing. But this is basically Scala's version of it, so you don't have to call utils.do something on the file class.
Cool, thank you for the explanation. So last time we discussed about this, it seemed pretty obvious to me, even though we were not many committee members, that this was an uncontroversial kind of choice. We seem to agree that an IO library was necessary, and we seem to agree that better files was the perfect solution after a fulfilled role. Is this still the kind of feeling of the committee, or do you have more ideas, or do you want things that do you have some things that you want to add to this discussion?
I'm not convinced people are going to want to do IO in the future. But if they are, I haven't looked at it. So I think I've always felt that was missing from Scala standard library. So, but I haven't looked at better files.
So I looked at it a little closer because I needed similar feature in SPT recently to do like file permission kind of stuff. And I I didn't really want to directly use it because like the way the functions were defined or it introduces the DSL kind of crashes with whatever I already have in the SPT's IO. So I was kind of more looking at it more from the kind of like implementation. But the one thing I noticed was that there is a lot of implicits and the default parameter values. So, I mean, I'm still, for having something like better files in the platform, but the maybe like style might be something we especially if there's going to be basically a bunch of third-party libraries.
Yeah, I agree with. So I agree with you, Gene. So those were, I think, bad choices that I made early on. So the DSL, the all symbolic thing, it's now gone. You have to specifically import some DSL object which brings all those symbolic things in. So they're gone by default. And yeah, so so when you're doing IO, there's a lot of parameters that needs to be passed in. And in Java, they are passed in using either default arguments or using some kind of another object. For example, are doing a lot of overloading. So for example, if you want to write to a file, you need to you probably want to specify, okay, what's like the intermediary buffer size, what's the codec or the car set you're going to use, how would you write to the file? Are you going to, what if the file is like, are you going to follow the symlink or not? So even writing to a file has probably 5 or 6 sane default arguments that needs to be specified. So in better files, a lot of them they're all there on the signature, but they are in the implicit parameters list. Usually the ones are always how to follow the symlink and how to follow what car set you're using. So that's going to go away again. They would not become implicit parameters. They would just become the parameters with default arguments. And it should be a seamless upgrade because moving those two, unless someone is actually using and them to overwrite, it's just one parenthesis that they have to change to a comma. But yeah, that's going to be in the next version of better files. But yeah, those are design choices I regret. One of them is gone and the other will go away.
Awesome.
Looks like for the second one, you could use this graphics to provide some kind of small rewrite for not break it. Just an idea. I mean, it's not something you have to do. I was just laying out the fact that you can do it.
Yeah, so like, for example, whether to follow symlink or not, I think what I end up doing for SPT IO is that I will basically include that into like a path wrapper object. So, I by default, let's say I'm not following like a symlink or something like that, right? And I can say with link option, true or false, or pass the options, and then it would create a new wrapper of the path, which can then basically will have a new. Maybe it's just easier if I like send like a PR or something like that. But we can try to kind of express this as object orientation, essentially, where the receiver knows its own options. So the method call itself doesn't have any parameters. That's potentially an idea you could explore. But okay. I mean, you can. This is kind of like a common pattern we can potentially see in any of the libraries that we might discuss, right? So how to pass a bunch of options it's kind of like a philosophical, never-ending debate in Scala. But it's I think that's kind of like. I just observed it as a particular point that we might want to come up with some sort of policy, basically, across different libraries.
I intentionally choose the least number of new abstractions or concepts I wanted to introduce in better files because people coming from a Java library already have to do with the cognitive overload of like path and file and buffered writer and print writer and streams and all that. Not introduce like a Scala abstraction for each of those things or even a subset of those things. So I just took the approach in better files, at least I don't know if it's the correct one or not, of just passing as much as parameters in a function with same default provided. Just because I didn't want to explain like, okay, so paths in Java. Well, paths in better files is this new thing which has all these other things that you have to. But I have no strong opinion. It's just the way, like a philosophical choice I took.
That's one of the major selling points, right? The fact that NIO is very easy to go and use better files as a better IO replacement without all the boilerplate that usually NIO brings or requires.
Yeah, I think in general that libraries which do not require you to create configuration objects in order to get anywhere end up being more approachable. For a power user, they may be less useful because you have to keep repeating yourself, or introduce the abstractions yourself. But for something intended to be a easy way to jump in and just use, I think it's actually better to have the parameters all there each time in the methods, because hopefully you won't need to use very many methods to get, to do what you want.
So related to this discussion, maybe it's a bit of a digression, but I think it's related. So do we have some sort of a style guide for what the libraries in Scala Platform should look like, starting from the syntax and the very coding style guide to high-level concerns like when should you use feature X, should you use default parameters, or you should use the builder pattern, should you use macros, when should you use the dynamic trait, so things like that. And like, are there any expectations on the library? Like, should it be cross-platform with respect to OS, stuff like this? So do we have something like this already specified, or
we don't?
Maybe? Okay.
We don't right now, and maybe it would be a good idea to do it. And not only for the Scala platform, but for all the Scala community overall. I think that our experience doing Scala during the last years can be materialized into some kind of guide or some kind of best practices tutorial that explains the trade-offs of all the language features and how they should be used, etc., etc. I think it would be good if we, gather together and try to write such a guide at some point in the future. Right now, it's so controversial, and people have so many different opinions that that's like at least a month, like a 2 months process to get to something that people agree on and people want to abide by.
Right. Yeah, I think it would be nice to have some kind of a unique, unified kind of feeling if you're using libraries from one platform.
Yeah, I agree. And Martin's take on this is that, in his view, that platform should be this kind of least powerful abstraction collection of modules.
Okay.
That's his personal view, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So probably one of the most controversial, but it probably will be useful to try to unify how we handle errors, right? Like, are we throwing exceptions everywhere like Java library, or do we try to use actual type, right? Or use try or something, like is that even a real compromise, right? So
yeah, that's a good question. Again, the design choice here was do not change any Java exceptions that gets thrown. So yes, the library does not catch an exception for you, but Java exception for you, but it does come with automatic resource management. So you can always rely on, so everything, for example, doing a write, it will close the resource for you if you if you are doing a write into an output stream in the finally block. There are always 2 versions of it. If you don't want to close the stream, you can do that, or you can have like an auto closed version, but it doesn't catch any exceptions for you because again, I wanted the people, it was very hard. It's very easy for people to wrap it in a try if they don't want to deal with exceptions, or I would have to introduce a lot of new things to handle all the exceptions that Java throws. And people, if you're doing something advanced, you may want to look at all those exceptions. So
now, this is a very hot debate and very
No, so maybe it's a topic for next
yes.
month or something. But I just thought, if we're going to unify like a feel of a platform, that might be one of the things, especially if someone is, if the library is still in during the development, and if there is a chance for us to make an advisory saying, could you please handle error in X or Y?
Yep.
This might be one of the ways.
Yeah, I agree. I think the idea is like there should be a library that is more pure. I think should be built on top of better files, because if not, that library has to do two things. It has to expose both a pure API to its users and also deal with Java's I/O inadequacies. And I think those are two different concerns. Like dealing with Java's NIO library, like, is just hard because it does a lot of non-obvious things, like try to copy a directory using the Java API's copy directory. It only works for empty directories, and for non-empty directories, it throws not an empty directory exception. So, so I think there are two concerns here. One is dealing with a very bad API that Java exposes, and one is exposing a purer API to people in Scala who are used to those kind of things. So Better Files just does one of those jobs, and I think a separate library should address the other concern, exposing a pure monadic API.
Yeah.
But that should not do the job. That should not also be doing the job of dealing with Java. I mean, that's just my opinion, but
my personal opinion on this is that I'm all for this kind of unification. I think that at the beginning, we're not going to be able to kind of add all these libraries to the platform and provide such a unification like from the start, because it's very difficult to synchronize and agree on decisions, especially in such a very diverse kind of effort as this one. So my opinion is that at the beginning, we kind of like look for the right fundamentals, even though maybe some kind of things could be improved. And then when the libraries start to be used and we see that there is more flow of contributors and there is more action and more movement, we can start creating this kind of start like shaping this kind of unification in very diverse ways. And it also boils down to the fact of whether we should or not add a validation library to the platform, which is something that at some point we should discuss. Having some kind of super minimal validation library that other libraries could integrate with and provide type classes for. Last time we discussed about this, Lars had some views on especially wrapping better files with more pure functional abstractions.
Yeah. So so my take on this is essentially that if you put 3 Scala functional programs into a room, you won't get them to agree on error handling. And if you add non-functional Scala programs, it will get even worse because they can't agree on anything. So I think the current approach by Better Files is sort of okay. The only viable option that I would see otherwise, something in the Scala platform as of now, would be to use try, because try is in the Scala standard library. I know that many people in the Scala community don't actually like try for various reasons, but it's the only thing short of what you suggested, adding a dedicated validation library there. On the other hand, I'm not sure if such a standard validation library has already been established, and I think there are multiple competing options there. And at this point, adding one to the platform, I'm not sure if that still adheres to the minimal, least powerful abstraction philosophy, because making a good validation library is actually pretty hard. You have to not only talk about things like adding, I don't know, like a monad instance or whatever instance, but you also have to talk about efficiency. So if you are inside a tight loop doing I/O, you don't want much allocation overhead, and also would need to talk about trampolining if you have big chains of things, and then you also need to talk about transformers if this stuff is wrapped into future. So I think this is opening a can of worms, and I'm not sure if we're prepared to do that as it stands. So yeah, so essentially, essentially I have to agree with what Patrick says. So what Better Files does right now, it just wraps the JDK and works around its issues and what people want to do with that after that. I mean, there could be a cats files module, there could be a Scholastic files module, there could be even an integration into what John has been doing. I forgot what it's called, but he has this library that abstracts over error modes. Yeah, so I guess there isn't a standard way yet how to do that.
Yeah. I would also like to add some other things that we should consider before deciding Better Files. One is the Scala platform also going to be a platform for other targets like the Scala JS or Scala native, or is it only for the JVM? Because for Better Files, Scala native isn't a concern because I think they are probably going to have linkers for the Java IO packages, and since Better Files only depends on Java IO, that's not an issue. But for Scala JS, a minimal API that the Scala JS people should implement and the Scala platform should implement, then Better Files may not be exposing the right API there because it does some things that are just impossible in Scala JS.
I guess it sort of is related to the third point on the agenda today, the making the Scala platform API independent. So
yeah.
So maybe we should just switch to that before voting on Better Files.
I guess so.
My opinion on this is that when you create a runtime, you also have to integrate with the established ecosystem you are targeting. And in this case, both the Scala JS and Scala native are very much aware that they have to integrate with JDK utilities and JDK libraries, and that means that they end up re-implementing them themselves for performance reasons and also for sanity reasons, because they want to have control over those things and how they evolve. Of course, that could be seen as some kind of duplication of effort, but in my opinion, that's the kind of good duplication of effort that we should not try to or aim to replace. This contributor that provided this or like offered or asked us to have this cross-platform Scala, cross-runtime Scala platform, I think that taking into account that this effort is taking some of our free time and requires lots of time, and to be successful requires money as well, I would say that we do not target other, we do not force other libraries in the platform to cross-compile to different runtimes. And I would say that the most reasonable thing is to encourage such a integration, but not to enforce it. Because re-implementing all JDK libraries is, as Eugene very well put some days ago, a multi-year, multi-person effort. I'm sure we are not ready for it.
But we don't have to implement it. We have to have someone from possibly Scala JS who can share a single interface that we should expose, at least for like an IO library. Maybe these are the 20 methods that an IO file util should expose, and they know they can target that, and we know obviously we can target it at JVM. Maybe that's the solution. And again, it doesn't preclude Better Files because, yeah, sure, someone can have that single interface, and Better Files could be the JVM backend for that interface. So
I mean, have we switched to the third agenda topic now?
Yeah, we switched temporarily because we need that to be
okay. So sort of the meta problem with the proposal, I feel like, is that the problem statement wasn't clear to me completely, right? There's two sort of solutions, solution space proposal in there. Number one is that we would move some of the stuff that we currently use from the Java namespace into Scala, right? Like a date or something like that. The second proposal is that the standard tooling, like compiler and build tools like SPT, would only depend on stuff from the Scala namespace and not use Java namespace. So what exact problem is it trying to solve? I wasn't 100% sure. And my guess was that when you're picking up something like Scala JS, it's not 100% clear to the users, like that which part of the Java is being supported. I think that's kind of mentioned in there, but is that the only problem this is aiming to solve? Or is it more sort of like a philosophical / like aesthetic thing?
I think the proposal is trying to solve that very problem, and it's trying to, that's the reason why it asks for re-implementing all the JDK utilities in Scala, so that all these things can be cross-compiled directly to the runtimes that the Scala supports and Java doesn't. So in my opinion, the way I read that proposal was that he wanted to solve that very problem. In my opinion, it's not a problem. It's just the way things are when you have different runtimes. It's not something you can solve without funding and people working on it full time.
Okay, so but if we magically have a lot of people and money, the community that benefits the most is the Scala JS users, basically.
And possibly Scala native users as well.
Okay, all right.
Because that would mean that Scala native doesn't need to re-implement, for instance, NIO or IO as they do right now.
Right. So,
okay, so I have a question about this. So maybe Jorge can answer that, or anyone who's involved with Scala JS. So I mean, there are parts of the JDK that are pure Java that don't do native calls, like collections, for example. And there are parts of the JDK that have to do native calls. So I understand that every time you call something native, you have to have separate implementations in Scala JS and in Scala native, obviously for obvious reasons, because you have to call to the target system. But for the pure JDK parts, or for the pure Java parts, do Scala JS and Scala native share any code?
No, they don't. To the best of my knowledge, they don't, and they have their own independent implementations.
So is there a reason why, for example, I'm just picking this as an example. So let's say Java util list, I guess this is implemented. So is there a reason why there are different implementations in Scala JS and Scala native?
I think there are good reasons, but I'm not aware of them.
Okay, so let's go with that, and then I'm going to claim that the proposal won't actually help much. Assuming that there are good reasons that there are different implementations in JS and in native, then I was wondering how you could actually try to unify the things and implement them in Scala once and for all. And this is also only applies to the pure Java parts. If you have stuff that calls to the system like Java NIO, I don't see at all how you can unify that by implementing it in Scala, because I mean the amount of native calls you have to do is like, I don't think any kind of shared code would help much there. But I mean, I'm not a Scala JS user, so I don't know. I don't understand all the different trade-offs there. But if you're telling me that they don't even share code in the first place, and there are good reasons, then I don't see how this proposal would help much.
Yeah, maybe it would be a good idea to discuss this in a future meeting and invite Sebastian and Dennis to talk about this in more detail. I don't know the specifics, so I cannot elaborate on them. But it looks to me like, for instance, some of the things that Scala native supports are not even supported by Scala JS, and that is, for instance, IO. And that's one of the reasons why Scala native had to re-implement from scratch all the Java IO and Java IO libraries. And to the best of my knowledge, there are still some parts that haven't been fully ported. And the same with other Java libraries, right? The intersection or the overlapping of all these libraries over different runtimes is not the same. So at best, you will, if this effort gets kind of approved, you would only be able to support a subset of the libraries that can be supported in all the runtimes that we are targeting.
Yeah, so my view here is that the core functionality in the libraries is often supposed to perform well under the platform it's running, and in that case, it will need to be implemented differently in most cases, really on each of the three main platforms because of the different performance characteristics, and or because of access to hardware that you represent differently in the different languages. And so again, I agree with the other sentiments that it seems like it's going to be difficult to get a consistent win here, rather than sort of pretending that there's something unified here. We may as well just accept that it's separate, and if we want to call it a Java something or other or Scala something or other, it's just a namespace. Switching the namespace doesn't switch the underlying difficulty of having to adjudicate between different underlying implementations. And even if it is Java namespaced and it can be pure Scala code, then fine, you can have a package that you can import for native and Scala JS that you don't import for the JVM. It uses a Java namespace to provide those things, and you're done. You don't have to do the renamespacing in order to share the code. So I don't think that the proposal is going to substantially help with the difficult part of the problem. And it might make things clearer with the less difficult part of the problem, but I don't think it's worth the effort.
I agree with that. I think that maybe a more balanced proposal would be to allow us to discriminate between library A and library B when one library fully supports all the runtimes and the other one doesn't. So maybe that would be more reasonable in the sense of if we're trying to find a library that is very good at one concrete task and we have different candidates, maybe it would be a good idea that we try to, of course, add to the Scala platform something that is cross-platform, if that exists by default.
Yeah, so I forgot to apologize on behalf of Conrad. He told me to apologize to you guys. But it reminded me that he wrote, I think, in this thread that, one of the benefit might be that you can kind of guess just because it's in the Scala namespace that it might work, like your IO or calendar or something like that. But I think his point is that if you truly want to support JDK and JS and or native, you have to actually run the test, right? And then if you actually run the test, you will quickly find out it actually passes the test or not. So that's basically what it comes down to, is that I think if your library provides like a JS function, that's great, right? You can declare it in your documentation. But to truly say it actually works, you have to run your unit test on that platform. So yeah, I think that's the state of affair right now, and I think that principle might even be okay for the error handling for now. Like we just document in your either in the Scala doc or in your like a README saying in this library I'm just gonna throw exception for these following methods, and you should expect that, and then I think that's better than nothing. I think like for now I think that's a good approach to say this is how it works on this.
So it seems that we are converging towards the same. Is there someone here in the committee that doesn't think like this?
I just wanted to add that when you say platform, Scala platform, it does sound to me like, originally it was compiled to JVM and .NET, and then JavaScript was added. .NET was never really a first-class citizen. And now, did I say, yeah, JavaScript now native. And, had originally it been to be targeting all those three things, that maybe it would have been less Java API focused. So I just sort of feel like a Java I mean, if the Scala platform is something that compiles to JVM, JavaScript, and native in the future, that what's in the Scala platform, I think it would be nice if it would work on all those places, which means I mean, that might be kind of what the proposal is trying to get at.
Yeah, but re-implementing IO and getting all the test coverage to 100%, and then that's a very difficult effort.
But maybe that it should have some really minimal functionality that we can guarantee that it's 99.99% same on different platforms.
Yeah, maybe. But who would do this kind of work?
And the other problem is just running the tests on all the, like our test matrix, because Scala test, we're trying to do all of these, and it just takes us forever, because we're also supporting 2.10, 2.11, 2.12, 2.13 M2, and Dotty. We're trying to, and it's like it takes forever to run all the tests on all those different intersections of things. It's a lot of it. Not only is it a lot of work to write the code, but it just takes a long time to run the tests. So anyway, it's an
interesting discussion, and it's something we should discuss in the next meeting, because it's a topic that we should definitely bring up and discuss about. Especially like when you look at the Scala test SBT, and it's a monster. That's big.
Yeah. But the thing the thing I'm wondering is, what does platform mean? If it's Scala platform, is that, I mean, if you look at Kotlin, it like says we go here, 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 and they add Android. So people kind of, well, then it's like it's removed from the JVM, but it's also tied to the JVM. So I'm not sure. I tell you what, I felt it was odd when we were porting all these things from the Java platform to JavaScript. I thought it was like, shouldn't we actually have, I sort of felt like maybe we should have a Scala API that is what the users see, and that's sort of the abstraction above what platform I'm at. But then I can also reach down at the platform if I want to, but then I would assume that would not port.
Well, I think the way that will work now is that, I think that the nice distinction to draw now would be that anything which is in the core Scala library should work cross-platform, and everything in the broader Scala platform for now could be JVM only, but you can have Scala platform JVM version, Scala platform, Scala JS version, etc. And then each one can say, this library you can use in everything. This one is JVM specific. This one is native specific because it does things only native can do, etc. That's an organization that would make sense to me.
Yeah, and maybe also within the Scala platform, we could have modules define concrete utilities for concrete runtimes in different packages. So if you have, for instance, library A and library A as package named library A, you could have a package. You could have library A.core, and there you would have everything that is cross-platform. And if you want something that is only supported natively, you would define it in library A.native or library A. the name of the concrete platform you are targeting. But that could be solved via tooling, but it wouldn't be like a trivial thing to solve. It's a big problem.
Can I just comment on this? What's been said about having to test against all the different Scala versions, Scala and Dotty. So, I mean, if the platform committee defines what the minimal APIs are, then, and they're really minimal, right? Then, and this is something you could incrementally build, of course. Then, I mean, the maintainers of those specific backends or compiler versions could be the ones to test this, to provide it as part of Scala. It's the same like providing, a type checker, right?
Yeah, but don't they do now? Don't they do that? Don't they?
Well, if we tell them to, right? Or if we present a good enough use case and arguments to them, then they might, right?
Yeah.
See what I mean? Like to say, there is some sort of an I/O, minimal I/O that every platform should support, and then the implementer of the compiler is, or the language should be or the backend should be responsible for providing it. I mean, it's kind of a more.
In some sense, that's how some of the things that you can do now cross-platform works. Either they are supported at compile time or linking time, and they kind of redirect to their own implementations to support some of the I/O is one concrete like controversial topic, but for instance, things like other libraries are supported this way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So in some sense, we already have that. We already implemented.
Right.
Maybe we just like try to talk to them and maybe kind of especially solve the I/O problem, which is the most contentious.
Right. Yeah, I mean, okay, but well, then with regards to this proposal, as I think Rex said, I think the biggest advantage is, and Conrad also mentioned, so I think the biggest advantage is the fact that if you do have this in a Scala namespace, then you know that in the future this is something that's going to be supported. Whereas if you start writing Java, you have to be always careful. Is this something that's supported by Java lib of Scala native, of Scala JS, and so on? You see what I mean? Yeah. Particularly because there are two Java libs, it's not always clear, like if you're using some package that is actually ported or not, or maybe in the future. So that's maybe one advantage that I see of this proposal.
Yeah, I can see this advantage as well.
Just one other comment I was thinking is that what would make it easier for people, I think it's going to be too hard to make things that work across all platforms all the time, but what would maybe make it easier for users is if it's by package, if I say like this package works on all three or it doesn't. Because like when we ported Scala Test, it was an afterthought to support JavaScript. So some of the things in this package work and some don't. Unless I move them around. So that just historically is what happened, which means it's really hard for people to tell what's going to work on JavaScript and what isn't. It's not by, here's stuff that doesn't work on JavaScript, in a separate package. So if it might be, if, some of a library works across platform and some of it does not, it might be good to separate the parts out that just work on a JVM as a separate, but at least a separate package name that maybe has JVM in it or something. JVM only, or I don't know how to do it. At least it's separate, so I can kind of keep track of what works and what doesn't work across platform.
We should probably have some kind of tool support for that and be able to tell that to users in a better way than we do right now. Maybe this is a discussion we can continue in the next meeting because it's about 6 and we've been 1 hour discussing about the Scala platform, and I'm glad that we are having such technical and productive discussions, but I think that we need to kind of wrap up and just continue discussing this in the next month. And I will think about this problem over the next month and try to come up with some solutions and propose something to the committee, to you, to kind of solve this problem. So maybe we have 2 options right here. We haven't finished the discussion here, but on the other hand, it seems that in some sense, there needs to be some kind of I/O library in the Scala platform, and at least we agree on that. So maybe we can proceed to the voting of better files and add it to the platform, and then figure out the cross-platform issues or the cross-platform requirements afterwards, and try to discuss with Sebastian to support some kind of the API of better files in some sense. That's one option. The second option is we delay this discussion and we delay the voting as well. How do you feel about this?
So I think it became reasonably clear that this is still unclear what to do with all the different targets and platform and versions. So I think to not obstruct progress, I would propose we vote on better files. Because otherwise we will probably be talking in circles, because figuring out this problem is going to take a long time and probably much more input from the broader community. So I just guess we can proceed with voting.
I second that.
Yes, I think so. I think so too. I think it's important that we are pragmatic in our choices in general, and just limit discussions and try to show some end products as a committee. So rather than just talking, we need to actually do something. And I/O clearly is a huge hole. We've just recently been looking at finding a proper I/O solution once more. in the space, and Better Files is clearly the one that sticks out. I don't know if there's any other alternative that really has 1,000 GitHub stars, so many commits, and so many contributors. So I think it's a no-brainer to just vote on it.
Yeah, so another I would add is that we can always increment version number. So I think whatever we today know to be good and stable to go, we should just call it version 1. And then version 2, if you want, include like native and JS, right? So I agree with others that we should just time box it to be now, and then let's just vote on the better files.
Yeah, I think that's especially important, especially because in the next kind of like months, this cross-platform debate will be more specific, and I think that at some point we may even be able to come up with some solutions to it, especially now that Dotty is coming in, and Dotty will also need to support all these runtimes in some sense. So. Okay, cool. So it seems that there is consensus here. So let's just vote, and just raise your hand if you want the Scala platform to include better files. Awesome. So unanimity. Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate that. So I'll keep you in the loop, and Daria, the girl, the woman that was at the beginning here with us, who is the communications manager at the Scala Center, will be doing the minutes, sending them your way, and we'll also be trying to gather some feedback and see how we can improve this process overall. So with this said, just wanted to thank you and say goodbye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks. See you, everybody.
Thank you.